He owned 3 mansions, a private jet, and a watch worth more than most homes. Yet on a cold, rain-soaked night, a single glance through his windshield brought his entire world to a dead stop. What he saw beside the road would force him to choose between the man he had become and the man he once was. Stay with this story till the end, because the final twist changed lives in ways no one could have predicted. And before we begin, if you believe real stories still have the power to move hearts, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now so you never miss one. The rain had been falling steadily since sunset, turning the city streets into long ribbons of reflected light. Adrian Cole barely noticed it. At 46, he had trained himself not to notice small inconveniences. Rain was just weather. Traffic was just noise. People were just shapes passing by the tinted glass of his luxury sedan. His driver navigated smoothly through the evening congestion while Adrian sat in the back seat, scrolling through emails about mergers, investments, and deadlines that carried 7-figure consequences. Another day closed, another deal won, another quiet sense of emptiness he refused to name. Adrian had not always been like this. There was a time when rain meant something else to him. It had meant running barefoot down cracked sidewalks, laughing as water soaked through cheap shoes. But that version of Adrian felt like a stranger now, someone who belonged to another lifetime. He leaned back, loosening his tie, already planning the late dinner waiting for him at his penthouse. That was when the car slowed abruptly. The driver tapped the brakes harder than usual. Adrian looked up, irritation flickering across his face. He was about to speak when something outside caught his attention. Through the rain-streaked window, illuminated briefly by the headlights, he saw 2 shapes near the edge of the road. Human shapes. One was slumped low, almost folded into the pavement. The other appeared to be trying and failing to hold them upright. "Why are we stopping?" Adrian asked, his voice sharp. "There's people there, sir," the driver replied hesitantly. "They look like they've fallen." Adrian's instinct was immediate and practiced. Keep moving. Someone else will handle it. The city was full of problems, and he had long ago learned that stopping for every one of them would drown you. His hand lifted slightly, ready to gesture forward. But then the car crept closer, and the headlights fully revealed the scene. They were elderly, very elderly. A man and a woman, both soaked through, rain dripping from thinning gray hair. The man was on his knees, trembling as he tried to support the woman, whose body had gone frighteningly still. Her head rested against his chest at an unnatural angle. There was no drama, no waving for help, just quiet desperation unfolding in the rain. Something tightened in Adrian's chest. For a split second, another image flashed in his mind. A different road, a different rainstorm. A younger version of himself standing beside an ambulance while his own mother lay motionless on a stretcher. He had been 19 then, broke, scared, and completely alone. No one had stopped that night until it was almost too late. "Sir," the driver asked softly. Adrian swallowed. "Pull over," he said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. The car came to a halt. The door opened and the rain rushed in, cold and relentless. Adrian stepped out, his expensive shoes immediately soaking through. He barely noticed. The elderly man looked up as Adrian approached, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. "Please," the man said, his voice breaking. "She just collapsed. I don't know what to do." Adrian knelt beside them without thinking, his tailored suit darkening as it absorbed rainwater. He checked the woman's pulse, clumsy but urgent. It was faint, but it was there. "We need an ambulance," Adrian said, already pulling out his phone. The man nodded frantically. "I tried calling, but my hands, they won't stop shaking." As Adrian spoke to emergency services, he became acutely aware of how vulnerable they looked. Their clothes were worn thin, shoes scuffed beyond repair. These were not people who had fallen through the cracks recently. These were people who had lived in the cracks for years. The ambulance arrived quickly, lights slicing through the rain. Paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, lifting the woman onto a stretcher, covering her with a blanket. The elderly man tried to follow but nearly collapsed himself. Adrian caught him instinctively. "Easy," Adrian said. "You're coming too." At the hospital, the chaos of the emergency room swallowed them whole. Nurses rushed past. Monitors beeped. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Adrian stood awkwardly at first, out of place in his soaked suit, until a nurse handed him a towel. He watched as the elderly man was guided to a chair, his face buried in his hands. Minutes stretched into an hour. Adrian realized his driver was gone, likely instructed to return later. He didn't care. For the first time in years, he had nowhere else he needed to be. A doctor finally emerged. "She's stable for now," he said, addressing the elderly man. "Severe dehydration exposure, and a heart condition that's gone untreated. We'll admit her overnight." The man let out a sob that seemed to come from the deepest part of his chest. "Thank you," he whispered, not just to the doctor, but to Adrian as well. They sat together in silence afterward. The man eventually spoke, his voice still shaky. His name was Samuel. His wife was Margaret. They had been married for 54 years. A lifetime condensed into a few quiet sentences. They had once owned a small home, he said. A series of bad years, medical bills, and one dishonest business partner had taken it all. Adrian listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't done with anyone in a long time. "I used to be someone," Samuel said softly, staring at the floor. "Not important, just useful." Those words hit Adrian harder than he expected. Before leaving the hospital that night, Adrian paid for everything. He told himself it was nothing, barely a dent in his accounts. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the point. As he walked out into the night, the rain finally easing, he felt unsettled. Something had been stirred loose inside him, and he wasn't sure he liked it. Days passed, but Adrian couldn't shake the image of Samuel kneeling in the rain. He found himself distracted in meetings, staring out windows when he should have been calculating risks. On impulse, he asked his assistant to check on the elderly couple. What he learned unsettled him even more. They had no permanent address, no close family. Margaret would be discharged soon, but they had nowhere safe to go. Adrian did something he hadn't done in decades. He drove himself to the hospital. Samuel was surprised to see him. "You've already done more than enough," he said. "Maybe," Adrian replied, "but I think I can do one more thing." He arranged temporary housing for them, then longer-term care, then medical follow-ups. Each step felt logical, manageable. Yet with every action, Adrian felt something else happening beneath the surface. He began visiting them regularly, listening to stories about Margaret's love of gardening, about Samuel's years working as a school janitor who knew every child by name. One afternoon, Margaret looked at Adrian with startling clarity. "You're lonely," she said. Adrian laughed awkwardly. "I have people around me all the time." She smiled gently. "That's not the same thing." The real twist came months later. A legal issue surfaced involving one of Adrian's companies. A zoning dispute threatened a major development project. Millions were at stake. During a public hearing, an elderly man approached the microphone. Adrian didn't recognize him at first. Then he spoke. It was Samuel. He spoke calmly, confidently, explaining historical land records, community usage, and overlooked agreements from decades earlier. As it turned out, Samuel had once worked closely with the city's planning office. His testimony shifted the entire case. The project was saved, not by Adrian's lawyers, but by the quiet knowledge of a man the world had forgotten. After the hearing, Adrian found Samuel outside. "I didn't know," Adrian said. Samuel smiled. "You didn't ask, and I didn't think it mattered anymore." That night, Adrian sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the city lights. He realized something profound. His success had been built on seeing people as resources, numbers, obstacles. But the greatest value he had encountered wasn't something he could acquire or control. It was connection. Adrian made changes after that. Real ones. He funded community programs not as tax strategies, but as commitments. He stepped back from deals that didn't align with the kind of world he wanted to live in. And he kept Samuel and Margaret close, not as charity cases, but as family. On the anniversary of that rainy night, they sat together on a small porch overlooking a garden Margaret now tended daily. Samuel raised a cup of tea. "Funny thing," he said. "If we hadn't collapsed that night," Adrian finished the thought quietly, "I might have kept driving." The rain began again, gentle this time, tapping softly against the roof. Adrian didn't mind it anymore. And if this story moved you even a little, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. Which part of the country are you tuning in from? Your story matters too.